That's incredible. The Central Bank of the USA is now openly admitting that they have lost control over monetary policy. Just take that in. The thing a central bank is responsible for, monetary policy, they no longer have a handle on. They've lost their grip on the helm. The head of the Atlanta Central Bank has now confirmed this in a Bloomberg interview. There are several central banks in the USA, and there are always several people who determine the interest rates at an FOMC meeting. And here we have very, very interesting assessments for the market. He also admitted that he was one of the few who voted for there to potentially be no more interest rate cuts this year, or only very, very few. He also talks about a shift that inflation potentially cannot be contained in the next 2 to 3 years. This means that what he is saying here is very, very contrary to what we are told. Jerome Powell says that inflation is somewhat under control. Donald Trump says that inflation is completely under control. He says here, no, inflation is not under control at all. We can expect another 2 to 3 years where we do not have inflation under control here. And additionally, we no longer have control over what is currently happening with monetary policy. We have no plan for what we are doing. We are clueless, but we are watching the entire interview, really highly explosive, so that one can also get an impression behind the scenes. And that's also what a lot of people have known for a long time. I've been telling you this all along. Since the beginning of the YouTube channel, I've been telling you the central bank has no plan for what they're doing. They're just doing something. They stand there in their suits, and people buy it and believe that those people really have it all figured out about the economy, about monetary policy, and so on. But anyone who does 2 minutes of research should conclude that the central banks are a big clown show and have no idea what they're doing, but they present it very, very seriously.
The dot plot didn't change, still calling for 2 rate cuts, but a number of people moved their dots up to say maybe we get fewer than that. Were you one of those?
I was one of those. So I was at 2. I moved to 1, mainly because I think we're going to see inflation be very bumpy and not move dramatically and in a clear way to the 2% target. Because that's being pushed back, I think the appropriate path for policy is also going to have to be pushed back in getting us to that neutral level.
Well, some of your colleagues also moved their dots down, suggesting that we might see more rate cuts, probably because they think the economy will weaken. What do you think the odds of an economy weakening because of fiscal policies are?
Well, what I would say is I am hearing more concerns about the trajectory of the economy. That's undoubted. But what I also will say is the data that's come in to date has not actually shown that, and we've still seen a resilient economy.
The Fed president here from Atlanta says, won't like it. Donald Trump says yes here. Hey, Jerome Powell, lower the interest rates, lower the interest rates. He has been one of the few, he said, who even advocated for just 1 rate cut here. And there are a few experts, apparently not in the central bank now, but there are also analysts who say there won't be any more rate cuts this year. I don't know if that will really be the case. He also says here that the economy is still running reasonably well, and so on. And that's exactly where Donald Trump wants to intervene, that he confuses the economy here, that he puts the economy under pressure. And these are very, very controversial statements. That means here the Atlanta Fed chief is saying, hey, yes, the economy is still reasonably good. And then there are other people, like Jerome Powell, who says, hey, we are potentially heading into stagflation. That means inflation plus a stagnant economy. You can already see that. So, even if you don't yet have confirmation here is that they have no idea, but we'll get to that scene later, where he then clearly confirms, hey, we are absolutely clueless, we have no plan here. But you can already see from the statements here that they have no idea. That means one says, yes, inflation is not a problem. Another says, inflation is a big problem. We need to lower interest rates. So, there are people who want more than 2 rate cuts this year. He just confirmed that here as well. They want to stimulate here because they say, okay, the economy is not that good. We need to stimulate the economy. He comes to a different conclusion here. He concludes here, yes, the economy is still somewhat good, but inflation will be a big problem for the next few years. And that's why I don't want 2 rate cuts, but rather I only want 1 rate cut. That means we have a whole bunch of chaos here, and everyone is saying something different. Everyone thinks they have the holy grail and have all the wisdom. In the end, it just boils down to this. None of them have a plan, not a single one, but they all put on suits and act like they know what they're doing, although they actually have no clue here. And that's the great thing about Bitcoin, that there are no people involved. I mean, people aren't inherently bad or anything, but when it comes to monetary policy, there's no one who can fail, no one who can intervene, no one who can change anything unpredictably. With Bitcoin, the monetary policy is set in stone. We have it prescribed. We know exactly in which year how many Bitcoins are distributed on average every 10 minutes. But now it continues.
We project things are going to be good. It's only been recently that they're like, no, we have no clue.
Don't know, families don't know, and local policymakers don't know either. So one of the things that really has impressed upon me is the idea that people are taking on board information as it occurs, what they're hearing are things that are leading to expectations that there'll be upward pressure on prices, so that inflation will happen longer. And I've taken that on board. So my projection of where inflation is going to go this year is pretty much sideways. And we won't get back to a more neutral level of inflation, our 2% target, I don't project until sometime early in 2027. But
Wow.
He says here we will now in the coming time still move sideways. We will not reach the 2% inflation target until 2027, and that is probably an honest assessment. I mean, the central banks, even Christine Lagarde and so on, they always tell you, yes, in a year it will reach 2%, next year, next month, and so on. But we see it never reaches 2%, and when it does reach 2%, it undershoots. Then we enter a more deflationary phase again. Well, not deflationary, but that's how it is. It's declining, meaning it goes more towards 1% or 0% or something like that. That means they can't manage to do their job here. That means we have central banks here with thousands of people employed, and they have only one job. In the USA, it's actually two jobs, securing employment and monetary stability. In the Eurozone, it's only monetary stability. So, they have one job, or rather two jobs, but they can't manage to get it done. And it's partly because of the reason that they have no plan. We'll also take a look at what he says about that. And that everyone here somehow has a different opinion on it, and everyone is somehow going in a different direction. He suddenly says here, yes, inflation will definitely not go down. It will go much, much higher. Other people say, yes, inflation is no problem at all. And now comes the truly shocking statement that just clarifies everything, where it becomes clear what is really behind the central banks. And that is simply nothing. In the next part, the Fed president is asked what he has to say about Donald Trump and whether he listens to Donald Trump. And now listen.
The president came out a short time ago and said the Fed should lower interest rates. When he talks, do you listen?
Well, we hear lots of voices. I would say my job is really to talk within the 6th district and see where policy should go based on what I'm hearing in terms of the momentum of the economy. And today, what I would say is there's a lot of uncertainty. Forecasting is maybe a bit more challenging than it's been in the past. But look, I stay on my job to just talk to the business folks that we see and hear from them to understand sort of what's happening on the ground. And that really is the thing that informs me very much.
Well, this is the part where I'm normally going to try to pry out of you some sort of guidance on future interest rate moves. But when you look at the summary of economic projections, the dot plot from last week, one gets the impression that you don't really have a clue at this point.
Yeah.
Well, you know, what we've heard and what I've heard is that we don't really know where the economy is going to go. Business leaders don't.
Okay, this I think is so crazy.
What we've heard and what I've heard is that we don't really know where the economy is going. I think that's so crazy that you have no clue, that you have no idea about what you're doing. And then he says, yeah, we actually have no idea what's going on in the economy and so on. I mean, at least that's honest. But that's the opposite of what central banks have been telling you for years. Yeah, we have everything under control. We know exactly where the economy is going. We know whether it will be inflationary or deflationary. We know whether jobs will be added, jobs will be lost, and so on. That's always the impression given, like we have everything under control. That's also kind of the job of the central bank, to basically tell people here the nice fairy tale, like we have everything under control. Because if they were to say, hey, the economy looks bad, we're drifting into a recession, we have a potential stock market crash coming our way, the currency will devalue massively, you will lose your purchasing power. Potentially we need to make a currency cut, we need to create a bailout package for the euro. Or whatever. If something like this were published here, then people would immediately flee from the dollar, immediately from the euro, and so on. That's why it's somehow the job of the central bank here to be a storyteller. Maybe Robert Habeck wouldn't be such a bad fit for the job of a central banker. In any case, we have the proof here where he clearly says, hey, we actually don't have a plan, but it's okay now, and for a very, very long time we had a plan, and that's the drastic turnaround that suddenly after many years, they say, hey, we have a plan, we have a plan, we have a plan, and now suddenly comes the turnaround, yes, we no longer have a plan. And the crazy thing about it is, as I mentioned before, they don't have one employee, they don't have two employees, they have thousands of employees. And if they can't manage to come up with a plan for the economy, a plan for monetary policy, then who is supposed to manage it? I mean, there's also the question, what are they doing if they don't have a plan anyway? The crazy thing is that it also confirms that every time they make an interest rate cut or hike or something like that, it's actually more like gambling. That means, on a whim, they either raise the interest rates or lower them. Sure, they will always say, okay, this is all data dependent. That's always the phrase Christine Lagarde uses so often. Yes, all data dependent. But if we're honest, and just follow through with what it means here, then it simply means we're gamblers. And sometimes we lower the interest rates, sometimes we raise them, and we can't really justify it. We have 2,000 employees here and 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 employees. And it all appears outwardly as if everything is serious here. But at the end of the day, it's all nothing but hot air. And that's why many people are so convinced by Bitcoin, because there are simply fixed rules here. Here, there's mathematics, and mathematics simply prevails here. Any arbitrariness from any people, from any clowns, from any clown show or something like that. And accordingly, you guys are now putting a link below. A link to 21 Bitcoin on how you can easily and securely buy simple Bitcoin. Here, with the code Bitcoin Hotel, you can get up to 20% off. The fees when buying Bitcoin, definitely check it out. An absolute recommendation. Guys, see you then. Peace out.